the Artist Care project has been a collaboration. Slides, yes, great. If we can pop them onto slideshow, there we go. Can we just go back to the first slide there, just so that just for information, really. I think one of the key things, and I think you'll get this from everything that we say today, is that the Artist Care project really is this collaboration. So hear me out, the Irene Taylor Trust and Good Vibrations have been the three music organisations really leading this work and this project, but working with us as the researchers at the University of Wolverhampton and the Royal Northern College of Music. So it really has been a collaborative effort. If we move on to the next slide, I'll just give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover through the session. So there will be a little bit initially of us explaining to you about the project, what we've done and what we found, but then we really want to open up for some discussion. We're very keen throughout this project to keep seeing how what we're finding, what we're proposing, how that lands with different audiences and take on some feedback from that. So I will give you a little bit more of an introduction to the project and the organisations. We'll show a brief video that will give you that introduction to the three partner organisations in a really nice and engaging way. So we'll show that in a couple of minutes, and then tell you a little bit about what the project aims to do and what we've done to this point. So a little bit about the research methods that we've undertaken. I'll then pass on to Mary Rose, who'll talk us through some of the findings, and then we'll start to have a look at some of the principles, and Sarah will start to talk us through some of those, and then we'll move into a discussion session that I think John from Hear Me Out will lead, and then we'll come back together for some final reflections, a couple of takeaways, and perhaps an ask that as a project team we might like to make of you. I think our next slide then is a little bit of an insight into the three partner organisations and the video that we want to show you. So I'll ask if we could have that video now, and it's only quite short.
So I'll stop sharing for this.
Can you all see that, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let's play that.
Improvising, and some people had a go at conducting. At the end of the week, we put on a full performance. I was a bit nervous, but it all came together and it was an amazing feeling. I even forgot where I was for a while. For that week, we weren't prisoners, we were musicians, and we were friends, and we were good too.
Yeah, this is what I mean by humanity. Let's come together as one. Because I will take a typical example of myself, a migrant from Mali who went through a terrible journey from my country. I went through the desert to find myself in Libya, where I joined the boat, migrant boat, and then to Italy.
Until the children come to our sessions, they don't actually know each other because there isn't any other activity that happens in one communal space where all the children can come together.
Because of the session, they can interact with others, they can know each other, they can line in something from here. So it's very helpful for them.
It's not about the situation that they're living in, it's not about where they're going to go, it is just about joy and play.
Hey, you sent me to this hell. You with no pride, but lots to hide. Laughing as I descended the stairs, thinking of the money, the years. You beat me once, but never again.
There are 3 strands to our work. Inside prisons, we run the Music in Prisons intensive projects, as well as the musicians in residence. Outside in the community, we have an ex-prisoner programme for people that have engaged with us inside, and that's called Sounding Out. And we also have a programme for neat young people called Making Tracks.
Definitely through music and through Music in Prisons, it's given a platform for people to maybe find a route to be able to express themselves, because sometimes within having the talent, there's no avenue to channel it.
Great, thank you. We'll move back to the slides now. I think hearing from the organisations and some of the participants gives you a much nicer introduction to the organisations than just me talking. I think before we go any further, one thing that I think is really important for us to just say today is that some of you, if you know the work of Good Vibrations, might have heard that unfortunately Good Vibrations has recently closed as an organisation, which has been particularly difficult for us, and we've been having conversations with some of the staff and musicians at Good Vibrations. So it's a very sad time. They'd existed as an organisation since 2003. For me personally, I'd been working with them since about 2007. So we'd had this really long-standing relationship, and they particularly, Jane Gibb, had been absolutely central to the Artist Care project. So what we talk about from here on, and what the work we've been doing and the findings was with and involving Good Vibrations, and we're now just navigating this as a project team with what happens with the Artist Care project, which will continue, but of course in a slightly different way, given that the Good Vibrations are no longer exist. Could we go on to the next slide? Thanks. I won't talk through all of this, but I've already started to situate this a little bit in that it is a project that is really born of a challenge that we've seen. This need to think about particularly the wellbeing needs of artists and musicians and staff working in challenging settings, and start to develop an evidence-based way of supporting people. And there's a number of reasons why that is particularly important, which is, of course, for the wellbeing of the individuals that we're thinking about, that we're working with, but also how important that is for organisations to thrive, to have a happy and healthy workforce, to keep people in the profession. So lots of reasons there, but also an extension of that is that if our staff, musicians are well and thriving, that will also by extension have a positive impact on the people that we're working with. So I think it's quite clear why this work is so important. So the project is about supporting the well-being of artists grounded in their individual needs. But something that we think has been a little bit unique about this project is while we've been thinking about and looking at those individual needs in quite some detail, we're also thinking about organisational needs and organisational structures at the same time, so that we can marry both of those things together to then propose new ways of working and test out new evidence-based models that really bring together both of those perspectives to be more successful. So we really grounded it in both of those. One thing that we won't talk about today, but an early stage of the Artist Care project was undertaking a quite in-depth evidence review of evidence from slightly different sectors to understand what we could learn about how to best support the well-being of different workforces, of workforces working in other challenging settings, so that we could really ground this project in that evidence base. So if anyone wants to see that work, we can share a paper that we've written on it, but we won't talk about that today. So the aim is to ground the work within those organisational needs, and then to develop different models of artist care that we hope in the future will be rolled out across the sector, that will really start to make a change in a way that is broader than the organisations involved in driving forward this project, so that it will have sector influence. And the other point for me to make here, we'll move on to talk about the research and the findings at the minute in a moment, but situated around the project team is a sector reference group. So that's a group of organisations, other music and arts organisations, but also representatives from policy organisations and funding organisations, because our sense in beginning this project was that if we had that sector reference group supporting the project, the findings would be much more likely to start to be embedded throughout the sector. So we've got this really great group of people supporting the project in that wraparound way. If we then move on to the next slide and the methodology. So I'm a researcher, I'm a complete methods geek, but I do get told off when I go into too much detail about the methods, because that perhaps isn't quite the most interesting bit about the project. So I'm just going to go through this slide quite quickly. We have, for this stage of the project, really focused on understanding those individual and organisational needs through 3 in-depth ethnographies with the 3 partner organisations. So this has taken a qualitative approach in a really in-depth way, understanding the experiences of the people that we've been working with. So we, and when I say we, actually this is primarily my colleague Mary Rose, who you'll hear from in a minute, has been out with the organisations, interviewing staff, interviewing artists, musicians, also working with those artists in the collection of diaries over a 3-month period to track how they were feeling, how they were engaging with support and care, and any challenges they might be facing over that time. So a really in-depth understanding of their own experiences, following that up with various different forms of communication, and also going in to do participatory observations a couple of times with each organisation to have a look at how the teams were coming together, how they were working. So a real wealth of data coming through from all of this. And Mary Rose has done a brilliant job of analysing and synthesising all of that into some very concrete findings that we've then translated into some principles for the sector. So I will stop there on the methods bit and pass over to Mary Rose.
Thanks, Laura. So I'm going to give a brief overview of some of the findings that crossed across all of the three organisations. So there were some that were very specific to each, but these were the kind of thematic shared findings. So what was really clear was that the three organisations were already doing lots of brilliant work in terms of supporting and caring for their artists, and this was a priority for them. And it did look quite different across the three organisations. For some, it was group supervisions that were wrapped around project delivery. Some offered individual supervisions, access to individual supervisions through external organisations. So one organisation offered trauma-informed training, which opened up a space for artists to share any practice-based issues that they were facing, and then to have people who were trained in trauma-informed to kind of, support them in a pastoral sense. So it was really interesting to see what was already happening. But this was happening under really constrained resources. So sector-wide, for example, in the prison and immigration sectors, there was a lot of staff cuts which had an impact on the delivery of the work. So, for example, in the prison sector, people were not necessarily familiar with the work that was being offered, and so they weren't necessarily embedded within the values and the importance of the work. So the staffing capacity issues at the sector level was having a knock-on effect at the organisational level. The organisations were also being asked to do more for less. So some of the artists working in prisons were being asked to do training to be key holders, for example, if there wasn't security staff there. So there were lots of additional responsibilities being asked of the artists. The organisations, all of them shared a commitment to respectfully paying the artists. So this meant that where possible, they wanted to pay them for attending any training sessions, paying to attend supervision. But again, this was within the context of a very constrained financial resources. There was also evidence of artist care happening in the moment, and that was very responsive. So, for example, with Hear Me Out, they work in a lot of the hotels where families from asylum-seeking backgrounds are housed, and there was a lot of additional care that was put in place in response to the far-right riots last summer, which maybe John might share a little bit more about later. So there was kind of the embedded aspects of artist care, but there was also artist care that was happening very responsively and responding to political contexts. So in terms of the artists, I'll give a little overview of some of the findings. The artists were really strongly embedded within the socially just values of the organisations. That came out really strongly. A lot of them shared the kind of juxtapositions of being a freelancer. So the kind of freedom it gave them in terms of giving them a space, for caring commitments, whether that be childcare or other caring commitments. Some shared that it suited their neurodivergencies. A lot of them shared that it gave them space to kind of develop their other creative endeavours. But often this was also set against the kind of precarity of being a freelance artist. So some shared the pressure and feeling like they had to say yes to work for fear that they might not get offered more work for a long time, and they had financial commitments. Some of them shared, that it had an impact on their health, so the risk of burnout from taking on too much work at the same time. And, often quite a lot of the artists were working across lots of different settings. So some were working in schools as well. Some were working in different charities and across different sectors. And then some shared about the kind of pressures at different times of the year. So in the summer, kind of having more performance work that they were taking on. And this was, added pressure. It meant that it impacted on them having a family holiday and things like that. So it was there was a whole, lots of different things that they were managing throughout the year in terms of commitments. And in terms of, quite a lot of them had shared lived experience with some of the participants they were working with. So, for example, some had experience of shared cultural or ethnic heritages, shared refugee background experience, and quite a lot of them shared about feelings, experiencing forms of secondary or vicarious trauma. So this looked differently, for different artists. But for example, worries around the children and families in the hotels and what had happened to them, or reflections on working with people who were in high category prisons and having this beautiful experience with them, but then having difficulties reflecting on that experience later. So there were different forms of stress or trauma that they shared. But in terms of support, a really big thing that came out with the artists was how important peer support was to them. So this was supported by kind of practice forums that the organisations offered once a year, but also informal forms of peer support that they built themselves. It was also a strong finding from artists who worked in prisons who were living together during that project delivery. So I'm just going to go on to all of these findings led us to kind of consider the fact that artist care needs to be, thought of as an interconnected cycle. So it's a holistic cycle which involves not just the artist, but everybody within the organisation, as well as the participants that the artists are working with, the managers, the facilitators, the support workers, volunteers. So everyone needs to kind of be embedded within the principles of artist care in order for it to work, in the way that they want, that the organisations wanted it to, and for there to be that shared understanding that it was operating within this difficult context. So I'm eating a cough sweet at the same time. So So we had this vision of artist care as this interconnected cycle. And then as a group, we came up with 6 key principles, which we have shared with lots of the organisations, the artists within the organisations at their practice forums. And we'd like to share them with you and to get some of your feedback if anyone would like to reflect on that later on. So artist care must not be a tick box exercise. It needs to work towards a cultural change across the whole arts sector. And with this, financially recognising the importance of this as an integral budget line. So we really wanted to be able to share it with funders and for this commitment to go to funders as well. The arts sector needs to support arts organisations to work towards a diversification of the sector workforce as a way to address intersectional inequalities. Artist care needs to recognise and support the specialist, empathetic facilitation skills as well as musical skills needed to be a community arts facilitator in complex settings. So that really came out strongly, the fact that just how complex the settings are and the vulnerabilities of the participants, and just how amazing all the artists are in doing this work. And we really want that to shine through really strongly and be recognised widely. Artist care is an interconnected cycle and therefore also means staff care, trustees care, participants care, and it must underpin the whole professional approach, including all the working relationships and operations of an organisation. Artist care must recognise that there is no typical freelance artist and it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. So we really saw that there were very bespoke needs according to individual artists. And we feel that a creative approach to artist care is needed, particularly given the challenging funding environment in which organisations consider how care practices can develop that are not contingent upon funding. So, thank you. I'm going to pass over now to Sarah and John to share a few reflections on how on their involvement with artist care and what they're doing with it now.
Thanks, Mary Rose. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah, the Artistic Director of the Irene Taylor Trust, and it's been amazing to be involved in this project and kind of see something that started as a kind of conversation between a few of us kind of grow into something which is becoming, I think, increasingly more important. I decided just to pick a few of the principles to speak about a little more specifically. However, what I'm definitely realising is that the more that we talk about it, the clearer it is that each of these principles are interlinked and each of them are part of a whole. So whilst it's good to kind of look at how the individual parts fit together, it is very much about all these things becoming kind of part of our working practices. So the first one was the one about it mustn't be a tick box exercise and we need to work towards a cultural shift across the sector. So we're in a position now where we talk about this artist care to and with anyone who will listen. It feels that important and that crucial. The formal care of artists is something that ITT continues to offer across the board where we can. And I think the key part of that sentence is where we can, as that is invariably to do with funding. So I personally, and we as a group, definitely recognise that there's still an awful lot of work to do to ensure funders come, listen and remain on board. And really happily that is happening. So it's kind of what we're working towards, I think, is a time that a line in a budget for supervision and care will only be questioned if it's not there, rather than because it is there. The next principle that kind of resonates is about recognising and supporting the skills that are apart from the music, if you like. I mean, it's all part of the whole, but the things that are not necessarily based in the music. So I think it's always been as much, if not more, about what you have to do in a pastoral sense with any groups that we work with when you're working in these kind of challenging contexts, because quite often the music seems to take care of itself. So our artists take on so much as regards people's issues and people's trauma when they're working on projects. And we know that we have a duty of care to support them, to help them think it all through, really, to enable them to continue to function at the top of their game. We have individual and groups of supervision available, and also R&D days, and all this has helped us to ensure that we keep conversations going between us, which enables us actually to respond to what people need, because that really does kind of change quite often. The thing about, obviously, which relates back to the first principle about developing things that are not contingent upon funding. And this feels to be incredibly important whilst we try to embed it in our funding asks and with funders. So for us on projects, we work in teams. And one of the great things about working in a team is that you can talk things through as and when they occur, which means that they don't kind of bubble away under the surface or kind of remain dormant to come back as bigger things later on. So we always encourage our artists to do this. And we also ask them to document it so we can keep a record of everything that might happen. So, when things start to recur, we can actually help to address things. The other thing we do is, because we do work primarily in teams, but we also have lone workers. So with the lone workers, we do have regular check-ins with them, and we encourage them to speak to each other, because a lot of the things that each lone worker experiences is something similar to another lone worker. So if we can bring these groups of people together, they can start to talk about it, as there are so many commonalities. So I think, thinking back, as well as it being really exciting, it also felt quite scary to be part of research like this, because on one hand, it's really great to be involved in something which focuses on the well-being of the people who deliver the work, as opposed to the participants who are receiving the work or the actual work itself. However, as a leader of an organisation, and many people might feel the same, sometimes you think you're doing something well and you think you're doing something effective. However, feedback tells you something a little different. So I think to have these principles to guide the organisation's thinking has been so enormously helpful. And I'm happy that it came out in the research that the freelancers that were interviewed recognise our efforts to ensure their well-being in a variety of ways. It's kind of always been important to us, though. It's only been over the past 5 or 6 years where supervision for our team has featured really strongly. As Mary Rose mentioned earlier, it is and should be a whole organisation thing from top to bottom. And I think it's down to the leader to enable this to happen. And I think even when you feel it's going okay, as I said before, you do know that you can never take your eye off the ball, as things change really, really quickly. So importantly for us, we also offer supervision to our staff team, as they're often the buffer between the people that deliver the work, the artists, and the contexts we work in. And this is especially in community projects. It's a really tricky sector to work in, and it does unfortunately feel that it's becoming more difficult. So I think we, as leaders of organisations, we have a responsibility to ensure that each layer of the organisation is given its own outlet and any additional tools that they feel that they need, really to ensure that they remain effective and also fulfilled, I think, in their working lives. And that any knowledge, and this is really important, that any knowledge they have isn't lost to the sector at the point it becomes too difficult and they become unwell and they decide to leave the sector. So it feels to me that I have a responsibility to the whole organisation to make sure that as and when we can, in whatever way we can, that we just continue to talk and we continue to help people to figure it out and to feel good about the work, because we want these brilliant people to stay in the sector. We don't want them to just crash and burn in any way at all. So they're my thoughts about it. John, you've probably got loads to add too.
Well, I'll try not to make it too much. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So yeah, I'm director at Hear Me Out. We do music with people going through the immigration system, immigration detention, and asylum hotels and places of that kind. And like Sarah and Irene Taylor Trust, we've been on a bit of a journey with this. I think, if I think back sort of 10 years to how we were doing things then, there were a lot of stuff that we have in place now that we didn't have in place then, and we were on a smaller budget and had a different sort of attitude to it. To be honest, I think we wanted to be nice to everybody, but we didn't feel we had the resources, and it wasn't a priority to spend serious money on things that would be directly supporting our artists as opposed to the participants, the groups of people that the charity was there to work with. So we had this we were kind of thinking more, we were sort of feeling that we had to focus our resource directly on the beneficiaries. And I think that, we've got a more sophisticated way of looking at that now. I remember a conversation that really started for me was kind of key to starting to change my thought processes on it, was when one of our artists rang me up and who'd been working. She said, "Hi John, as you know, I've been working for 18 months in this detention centre." She'd been running singing activities at a detention centre more or less every week for 18 months, and she said, "I just got to stop for a bit, because it's burning me out. It's too stressful. I need to take a break." And I didn't know that was the case. I didn't know that was how she was, how it was for her, because we hadn't been paying close enough attention, I guess. And so it was a bit of a wake up call. Like, we should have seen that coming. It's okay for me to be warm and understanding in response to that, but that's a very reactive stance. And I think over the years we've started to get more over the years since we started on this partnership. Our practice has developed while we've been going along there. So as we've been researching it and talking about researching it, at the same time, it's been a moving target because our practice has changed in response to all sorts of things that have been going on. And I think for us, what's at stake here is, it is obviously about the duty of care to people who work for us, but it's a sort of wider thing than that. It's about the whole culture of the organisation. We're on a journey of sort of trying to create. We're taking organisational co-creation very seriously, and been doing a lot of work for the last 3 or 4 years to change how we make decisions, so that instead of having rather a traditionally run charity running very participatory, very co-creative artistic work, we bring that spirit of co-creation into decision making in the team and in the board. And so that's obviously, a lot of that is about lived experience leadership and bringing experts by experience into the work. And we've been doing a lot of work on that as well. But actually the artists are kind of an integral part of that, because co-creation does mean with everybody who's involved, and the artists are absolutely sort of central group, obviously, to the work of the organisation. Indeed, obviously, goes without saying, we couldn't really deliver anything without them. But it's also the case that our artists are a very diverse group. I don't know if this is, I'd be interesting to know how many of the people here are from organisations with very diverse groups of artists, but I don't think that's particularly the case across the arts sector. That the information out there doesn't seem to suggest that is the case. But for us, we have very few artists who've been to conservatoire. Most of our artists are from marginalised backgrounds. Some of them are refugees or migrants themselves. We have people from a lot of different backgrounds, and so the issues that arise out of that are to do with if people who haven't had easy lives themselves have an incredible extra thing to offer when in the work that they do for organisations like ours, but they may sometimes also be less well resourced to kind of to be able to deal with their own stress because they haven't got the same resources. They can't take time off. But perhaps they're leading precarious lives themselves, and so on and so forth. So supporting the artists is part of a whole organisation thing about how we make our organisation safe for everybody, that everybody is involved, that everybody is in an environment in which they can sustain what they're doing for us, and that will make us stronger and strengthen our impact. So I wanted to say, I mean, I guess the actual principles all strike. They're all really important and really valuable. But I just wanted to say why this. I wanted mainly to say why this matters to us really, and why we're putting time into it, the time on this project and the time on our practice. So perhaps I will leave it there.
Thank you. Thanks, John and Sarah. I think that will lead really nicely into to opening up the discussion more widely. And it's really interesting to hear you sharing, your engagement of the principles in working practice. So, John, I think you're going to lead the discussion, aren't you? I'm hoping.
Yeah, apparently.
Thanks. So I'll pass back to you.
So, there's a couple of questions in the chat as well from people. So, just to add to the discussion.
Thanks, Michelle. So I've got the chat in front of me, and what I'm going to try and do is keep an eye on it. But Michelle, are you okay to shout at me if I'm missing something?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Right, and so everybody, if you have a question, then either stick it in the chat or please do electronically. I think electronically, because there's quite a lot of people and I can hardly see anyone on my screen. So I think electronic hands up is going to work a lot better than doing that, because I probably won't be able to see you. Does that sound right, Michelle? Is that a decent way?
If you can stick that'll be fine. Yeah, if you can stick your hands up, we'll try and catch you if we can. There's a lot of you on the line, so bear with us.
That's great. And Michelle and I'll both keep a lookout, and you'll do a better job of it than me, Michelle, I'm sure. Anyway, so let's start with, I noticed there's a question in the chat from Sandra Hall at Friction Arts. What does your group supervision look like? Sarah, do you want to come in on that, and I can try and answer a little bit from our perspective as well.
Sure. I actually haven't been on one of our group supervisions for the very reason that we leave it separate. So if people want to bring up something organisationally, they can do so in a safe space, and it gets reported back.
Sarah, so sorry, Mary. Is it possible to unshare the screen so we can see faces now whilst we're in the discussion? Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks,
great. Mary. Thank you.
Okay. So as I understand it, we have external facilitators, and the group supervision is any of our artists getting together just to speak about things together and to get expert guidance and support and help through anything that may have been coming up in their working lives, and I expect also coming up in general freelance lives. But I think it's the important thing about it is that people were given the option to do individual supervision or group supervision, and the majority actually chose group supervision because they felt that they could learn a huge amount from the other people doing the work.
Thanks, Sarah. And in our case, I guess it works at two levels for us. One is that most of our work is delivered by artists working in pairs and across a block of work over, a period of 2 or 3 months in a given setting. There might be more than 2 people actually doing that because we schedule different people in different weeks and stuff. So one of my colleagues who's sort of organising all of that will have meetings with the people involved in that block of work before and after, and I think sometimes in the middle as well. That has happened too, and so that's an opportunity for people to reflect on, plan and reflect and adapt, and stuff will come up in those sessions about what's gone off. In those conversations about what's gone off in the session. So that's a really important tool. And the other one is that we work with an organisation called Partisan, which is an organisation made up of psychotherapists and psychologists who've got a mission to bring their skills into underserved communities and oppressed communities. And they do a lot of direct work themselves with young people, but they also provide a kind of supervision to some other organisations that are also reaching underserved communities, if you like. And so we have once a month we get a half day with one of their team, and we've used that in different ways at different times. But one of the ways we've used that time is to have a session for artists who can come along and and then it's a sort of open agenda, and people talk about whatever they want to talk about, and of course they spark off each other, and it's a supportive environment. So there's that kind of, I guess you could call it clinical supervision. I'm not sure it is quite, but it's something in that ballpark anyway. I think Mary Rose, one of the conclusions you came to for us as an individual organisation in the research was that we had some decent provisions in like those for that were working at a group level. We were doing much less at individual level, and that's something for us. That's kind of one of the next things that we will be trying to work on. Yeah. Who else have we got?
Got Jenny Young has.
Jenny, do you want to come in?
Hello there, John. Thanks so much. It's been so brilliant and insightful to hear the sharing and the learning. Briefly, we're Blue Cabin, and we're a charity based in the northeast of England. We work with care experienced people, and we've been on a almost 10-year journey with this question about how we can ensure we're providing support for our whole team. Lots of things that you've said really resonate with that, in that we have paid for therapeutic supervision, paid for self-care sessions, and paid for trauma awareness training. I definitely recommend Kazuma Art's trauma awareness training to anybody. It is amazing, and that underpins all of our work. Some of the things we've learnt, John, and I wondered if this had also come up for your organisation, is how we can expand the therapeutic supervision offer and self-care and care more generally across the team. So I now have therapeutic supervision as director of the charity, because I know that I am also holding the emotional labour of the team that I support, and I need support to be able to process that as well. So that's built into my time. Also, our board do sign off our core costs, which cover paid for therapeutic supervision for everybody, but that's ensuring that they also have an understanding of trauma and the impact upon individuals. So I suppose it's around the development of language. We understand that we're working with trauma impacted individuals in trauma impacted organisations like local authorities and prisons. And also, as a result of that, we may be trauma impacted too. So I think that sense of, has it enabled you to develop language around trauma and what that means and what that needs. And then finally, one of the things that we have been looking at in terms of that individualised approach is the concept of rest days. And I'm just wondering if that has come up in the work, that particularly for our artists who are working in prison settings, whether rest days is something, paid rest days, we can build in for those, because their resilience is certainly impacted upon. Even though we put everything else in place as well, the idea of rest days is currently being explored.
Thanks, Jenny. Sounds like a load of amazing practice and a lot of issues you've raised there that very much resonate with me, certainly. I'm not sure who wants.
Jenny, is it possible for you to share the name of the trauma-informed training again?
Absolutely.
Please?
Do you want me to put a link in chat as well?
Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Who want? Mary Rose. Not to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if you want to comment on that, because there's Jenny's raised a sort of like a range of. She's talked about a whole range of different aspects to artist care. There, it's about that holistic thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we hadn't around the language aspect, because at the beginning of the project we weren't really using the terms trauma informed, but we started to see the connections across trauma-informed practice, and interestingly, talking to the artists and in their diary reflections as well, none of them kind of used the words, none of them shared the words vicarious trauma or secondary trauma, yet they shared a lot of emotive language around how, you know, the worries that they had about families or about what happened to some of the people because the artists were also working in hospitals as well. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting area. And when I asked them, would you say that you've experienced trauma yourself from this work? They didn't necessarily recognise that themselves, but yeah, I don't know whether Laura, if you want to add anything about that.
Yeah, thanks. I was hovering, waiting to come in. Just to say, just for context, so my background is as a psychologist. So I came into this project, into these conversations a few years ago, with what I now realise is a very narrow view of thinking about artist care. So when I think about where I thought or might have predicted that the learning that this project would go and what we would draw from it actually has entirely expanded my thinking. So I came into this thinking we were probably going to be talking about quite standard supervision practices that we might see. Say we're talking a lot about prison settings, for instance, and as psychologists working in prisons, we would have structured supervision. And when we looked at the evidence review that I mentioned, that we're just going through a final stage of peer review, and then we will get that out to all of you. But when we looked at the evidence base from different settings, lots of the evidence we're looking at is that quite structured, quite defined, and probably quite narrow look at how people are supported. And what working on the Artist Care Project has really done for me has really pushed me to think in this much wider, much more holistic way. So when we're thinking about what evidence of effectiveness looks like, actually what I have learned is that we do need to be much more holistic in the look at that we're not only thinking about those kind of add-on supervisions or support sessions or clinical engagements, however they might look, but much more about how that fits within this wider picture of how a team's supporting each other. Some of the practical things that we've started to hear about here. So this issue that we've talked about as a project team, when we're thinking about freelancers, and so when they might be rushing or racing to fill their time and not having those breaks, so that much more holistic look at how do those organisational structures, those funding structures actually support that opportunity for people to be able to take care of themselves, one another, all of those sorts of things. I'll pause there so I don't hold.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks very much. Do you want to add anything, Sarah, on any of these questions so far?
Only that with Jenny mentioned having supervision herself, and I have to say it's one of the best hours I spend my supervision session. And it's really opened my mind to the importance of taking care of myself, as well as taking care of all the other people in the organisation and doing this and that and the other. So, I can't even think why I never did it, but I'm glad I'm doing it now. Totally with Jenny on that one.
I guess I could add. So I have a line manager who's one of our trustees, and then there's another trustee who isn't my line manager but does a kind of how is it going for you kind of thing. So I talk about the work with one person mainly, and it's not a hard and fast thing. But then I have somebody else who I kind of talk about how it's going for me, and I must say I find that really helpful too. And I think I remember a really long time ago now, before I started working in the third sector, I was a primary school teacher. And I remember working in this school in quite a tough part of town in Sheffield. And the heads, lots of families with lots of difficulties in their lives. And it was a challenging place to work, And the head was really, really brilliant at supporting the kids and supporting the families, but he was rather poor at supporting the staff. And it kind of, you could really see the problem with that. I mean, apart from the fact that individual staff might feel under-supported at times, was just that it didn't really work, because that culture of care has to run the whole way through. That's the point. I think that's what I learned from that experience. And so it's probably a good thing that people like Sarah and me and Jenny are having that support ourselves, because it sensitizes us as well, and we're leading by example a bit as well. And right now, I mean, if I think about the climate that Hear Me Out is working in, where we have to do lots of risk management because we don't know whether there have been points where we've thought there could be violence outside asylum hotels where we're working and things like that. I mean, it's quite bad at the moment, right? And so there's a lot of work that we are doing on care there. There's sort of physical safety to think about, but also how people are feeling and that kind of stuff. And if I imagine us trying to tackle that as we were, say, 8 or 10 years ago, it would be much harder. We're better equipped as an organisation because we have stuff in place, some of which is sort of actual things we do, and some of which is just how the relationship and the whole way we work with our artists and how we're connected to them and the kinds of conversations that we have and so on and so forth. That has all changed as well. And it means that we're more closely knitted together, and we're more like we can have those conversations more easily when we need to about the risks and difficulties and stresses of doing the work. Let's see. Next question. Have we got anyone in the chat? Michelle, has anyone raised their hand? I'm not seeing a raised hand.
No, there is one question that I've noticed from Sandra Hall at Friction Arts. I'm also interested in the components towards how you've shifted the internal culture, particularly around the board.
Sandra, do you mean the internal culture around artist care specifically?
Yeah,
or
I mean, you talked very eloquently about the importance of how you changed. You got a real internal shift, and you kind of, because we too have been around quite a long time, so we've sort of seen how everything was focused on the participants for years, and then actually realising the impact. Even in primary schools, that we're working that are really frontline places, and kind of making the shifts. And sometimes I can't see if we've done a holistic approach or whether we're doing sort of components that in a way make a whole. And also I'm neurodiverse as well, so my thinking goes all over the place. And so I suppose the question is, what were the components you put into place? I mean, obviously you start with discussion. Are we doing enough? Do we need to change the way we're doing it? Well, I understand all of that, but actually, what were the bridges into really making those shifts happen?
That's an interesting question. Do you want to say anything to that, Sarah? Do you want to come in there?
I think the bridge it's quite exciting for us because we've been kind of wanting to do it. We've done it in a bit of an ad hoc way. It was actually sourcing some funding, which helped us think about it very clearly and very thoughtfully, I think. And we got feedback from a lot of our musicians as to what they might like to do it. So that was a key thing, I have to say, for us, because if you've got some specific funding in order to develop a particular strand of work, and we do feel this is kind of a strand of work as well, then it just offers you the time and space to be able to do it. And in all of our lives, I'm sure there are things that go by the wayside quite regularly because there just isn't enough time to do stuff. So that was a real key thing for us. Now our challenge is to continue to raise money in order to be able to continue it. And that's really, I just think about, just speaking about it well in budgets and speaking about it well in narratives and the importance of it. And then, across the whole project, or all the projects, you add in a little bit which allows you to do the work that you want to do. But I noticed also, Sandra, you were saying about some thoughts on how to get the board on board. From our perspective at the moment, we're so lucky because we've got a board which is probably 50% of it has changed recently due to people standing down at end of term. And we've got some brilliant people in. The chair in particular is wonderful at the moment. It completely understands the importance of talking about things and is very, very supportive of anything we want to do in that area. And I think, the way that he talks and the way that now the organisation talks about this, the rest of the trustees have become more thoughtful and more supportive of the different groups of people we work with and are engaged on a much more I suppose, impressive level, really, because, boards quite often are apart from the actual work and just...
Yeah, no, I mean, we've got a great board, but there's, they're so in demand in their own creative lives.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to, and it's actually trying to book the time with them.
Oh, right.
Absolutely committed to what we do. And most of them are on the board. It's just that bridge between getting them to actually... actually activate doing some work. But I think what you said about kind of building a project that's about the organisation and how it takes care of itself. Because also, we've all experienced artists that we've given a massive care package to, but actually there's possibly some narcissism in there and some all sorts of stuff going on that means that we'll never be able to do enough for them. And it's also how do we get protected in that? And and they are really fantastic. It's just I think I need to be clearer about what we require from them. And, there's never time at the board meeting to sort of have those discussions, because we're sort of powering through lots of stuff. Anyway, I can feel myself starting to waffle, so I'm going to stop.
Yeah. Sandra, just one thing about that might be an interesting thing to do if you don't already do it. We've now at last worked out all the things that we don't need to talk about in trustee meetings that we can set aside. And we are now in every meeting setting aside a chunk of time to talk about something that's important to us. And that might be a way of doing it, just chucking it on the agenda and saying, right, we're going to talk about this, and just start to gauge people's feelings about it, because you might find on the board that there's a huge amount of support, and you also might find there are people that might be able to say, oh gosh, yeah, I can put you in touch with somebody that can help or support or whatever. And if there's no response or no anything, then I think that there should be, is what I think. And somehow it's about getting them on board, making them realise that it's important to the health of the organisation that they are responsible for. And if not, maybe few additional trustees.
Don't
know.
I'm going to ask Laura, Mary Rose, is there anything here that, for example, have you got anything to add here? Did the ethnography, for example, Mary Rose, did it throw up any issues about that process of internal change, or was it more focused? Obviously, the main focus was on the actual work as it is now, but...
No, not particularly. It seemed that I got the sense that there was that kind of feeling of a shared internal culture around this. I think because of the things like the practice forums that you hold and just that kind of peer support process. And but then, it'd be interesting to expand the ethnographies further and perhaps, to look at the participant groups. And I think that would be a really interesting thing to see how it's... I came to observe some of the artists' performances with your participants, and I got that sense as well from them. So, it's a very interesting area. Laura, do you find that?
I think the only other addition I would make to that is, I guess we have this weird thing as researchers about the research kind of is existing over here, but by being part of a project like this, what is almost the impact of being part of it rather than the research itself. And I think that for all of the organisations involved, because this has been so live for all of us, and because we're talking about it, talking to different people in our organisations, but also including the boards, I think that the sheer existence of the oops, I don't know if I froze then. Can everyone still hear me okay? Yeah, good.
Personally, I lost you there a bit, Laura.
Did you? Okay, I don't know what is happening today. My video keeps stopping. I'll persevere. Just the point about, I think actually being part of a project like this, engaged with it, is prompting those discussions across all of our organisations. And some of the things that have kind of been a byproduct of Artist Care to this point, so where we have invited in other people from all three of the partner organisations, including some of the board members, to engage in a conversation quite similar to the conversation we're having today. I think it's keeping it live on everyone's radar, just almost making it a norm within organisations that this is part of the culture. These are the sorts of conversations that we're having. Change takes time, and we all know that different people, particularly busy board members, maybe get on a different stage of that journey sometimes. But I think being part of this, continuing to talk about it, is particularly key.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, and I've just got a comment on there from Nick Cutts, who kind of feeds into that, actually. I absolutely agree that artists need and deserve care within organisational practices. Embedding care within practice is critical to this. Where this works best for me, it is embedded into the partnership beyond the organisation delivering. I wonder, however, if we risk presenting artists as delicate, not appropriate for the challenging settings in which we are trying to integrate them. Another way to think about it, perhaps what care could be provided for staff within our partner organisations. How is this facilitated, and how can this extend to the whole partnership, and what role can the artistic organisation play in this bigger piece? It's a question from Nick.
Wow.
John, I wonder whether that might be almost a nice link into me just saying something about what next with the Artist Care project. I was just looking at the time and wondering whether I might.
Yeah.
Should we move into that? And I think that might speak to that question.
Okay, Laura, go for it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Lots to think about there. I wanted to just to draw things together by just saying something about what next in three different ways. So the first thing is, what next is an ask of everyone on this call. So I think hopefully Mary Rose might just be able to put the link to the report and some contact details in the chat, but I know we're going to follow up with some of this as well. So what next in terms of the ask for all of you is, we've shared those principles. We've been sharing the principles with various different audiences through 2025. And what we would really like is any more reflections, any more thoughts on those principles. How are they landing for you? If you might start to implement any of that in your own work, in your own organisations, we'd really like to hear about it. So if you could engage with that, but also please share the report, share the findings, because for us the Artist Care project is not the project in a narrow sense, but is all about conversations like the ones that we're having today. I've seen so much sharing through the discussion, through the chat, about good practice. So we want to use the project to promote more of these conversations. So if you can share all of this and that link to the report more widely, we'd really appreciate it. That leads me on to the second point about what next. So I started at the beginning of the session saying something about our sector reference group, and that is particularly involving policymakers, funding organisations, other practitioner organisations and other researchers. And I think that's a crucial mechanism for thinking about how we embed artist care throughout all of that priorities policy. So we'll keep working with that sector reference group, which I think speaks to that bigger picture. And then just a final point on that is that the research will be continuing. We'll be starting to move from those models. So we've got that understanding of individuals, organisations, we've got those principles. We'll be moving that on into a phase where it's much more about developing more defined models that we can test out, and that will be quite complex because of this holistic conversation that we're having, but that we can test that out so we start to gather some really robust evidence about how this works, what works, so that we can continue to share this across the sector. I think I need to stop talking now before we run out of time, but thank you very much everyone for engaging in the discussion today.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. A really interesting conversation, presentation, just about how we can keep ourselves safe, as well as our practitioners, as well as our whole organisation. It's a tough time out there, so this is even more so that we need to have those conversations. So thanks so much for joining. If you could complete the questionnaire, that would be amazing. It should take you a couple of minutes to complete that. We'll be sharing the video as well once it's all been edited and produced. So yeah, just wanted to say thank you so much again for taking the time to listen in on this session, and hopefully see you soon. Thank you.